Hello and welcome to Dinner for Her, a podcast about historical women with flavor. I'm your host, Mandy Walker. Since this is our first podcast, I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about myself, why I wanted to start a podcast about powerful women in history, and as my wonderful mother-in-law asked, what the heck does dinner have to do with anything? So, in a nutshell, and so that I don't just ramble on for hours about how much I love and respect and admire powerful women, I will just shortcut this by saying that I think that a lot of you can agree that we're in a very weird time to be a woman, especially in the United States. And very truthfully, just in thinking about things that I can control and things that I can do to try to make the world a bit better for my daughter and for the wonderful women in my life that are my friends who are experiencing a lot of doubt and anxiety about the direction that we are going, and to remind us about how far we've come, I decided that I'd like to do a podcast where every week me and these great women that are in my lives can get together and talk about other powerful women who have come before us, what they mean to us, what lessons we can gain from their lives and their experiences, and how we can apply those in our own lives. The dinner part. So food is a very humanizing aspect of our existence. History can be a really abstract construct for a lot of people. You know, it happens to be something that I'm really interested in and passionate about, but not everybody is as much of a history nerd as I am. And so I think that it could be a little bit boring, frankly, and a little bit hard to relate to some of these women if you don't have the ability to kind of humanize them. And food is a wonderfully humanizing thing. And I also think that by getting to experience flavors and recipes that these women might have actually prepared or eaten, or in the case of Eleanor, recipes that were actually very fundamental to crucial parts of their lives, we can really put these women in their own historical context, and we can also see them as fully realized human beings. That's a very flowery way of just saying that I think that food and eating the food that they may have had is a way for us to connect with them on a human level and not just as maybe a big, powerful figure from your history books. So, for our first episode, I thought I knew exactly who I'd wanted to cover. Queen Tamiris, who was an Iranian queen from prehistory, who was someone who defeated a very powerful ruler of the Persian Empire. She is one of my favorite historical figures. And I also knew that I wanted my dear friend Zahra to be the one that came on with me to have this conversation. Zahra and I have been friends for over 25 years. She embodies everything I admire in a woman. She's smart, she's funny, and she's extremely resilient. I knew our conversation would be entertaining, at least to us, but then I thought, whenever possible, I'd like my guests to choose who they want to speak about. And when I asked Zahra, she chose Eleanor Roosevelt. So, Zahra, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, maybe how we met, and what you think about being here doing this with me today?
My name is Zahra. I have lived in Tennessee for over 30 years now. Came here in the 90s in U.S. and Tennessee was the very first state and continuously the state that I've lived in. I met Mandy when I was barely speaking any English and had my second job at a very little cute restaurant named O'Charlie's. She was wearing a lot of hats back then, and she still is, but back then she was working as a server, I believe, and I was the little prep cook in the back that barely spoke to anyone. And even if I was confident in my English, many people that learn a second language are very shy at first because they don't want to make mistakes. So I was very shy, but she approached me and she made friendships and then continuously have kept up with me. Lost track of each other for a little while, but then we found each other on Facebook. Thanks, love. What else did you ask me? I'm sorry.
I think that answers it. And
yeah.
I want to say that one of the things that I admire the most about you, so I want to go back and talk about baby Zahra when I first met her. You were what, 18 years old?
I believe 19 when you met.
Okay.
Yeah.
you were 19, you were a single mom, you moved here not speaking a word of English or barely a word of English, and you taught yourself completely. You got yourself bilingual, then you went out, got a job, and were supporting yourself and your child as a teenager in a culture that was brand new to you. And you have just I know you say that you were shy back then, which that is not how I remember it.
Not shy, reserved.
Maybe, but I think that if you asked anybody that knows Zahra then or now, reserved is just not a word that I think of when I think of you. I think of you as very outgoing. I know what you're saying. It's one of the things that I admire so much about bilingual people, is it takes such courage, especially I think if you're an intelligent person. I almost think that is sometimes harder because when you start out that a lot of people think that you sound stupid. Stupid people think that you sound stupid, that don't know how hard it is to be bilingual, and that you have to struggle through those early days of not being well understood to get where you're going. And a lot of people give up. I love languages and I know a lot of words in different languages, but I've never been able to be bilingual because I struggle with that. I hate feeling stupid when I try to talk. So I admired so much how quickly you learned and how quickly you became
30 years.
Hey, look, you were, in my opinion, fluent very, very quickly after you got there. And it doesn't seem like it took any time for you to be one of the funniest, most dynamic, interesting people that I've ever met. And also incredibly strong and incredibly smart. So I'm just so happy to be here with you today. But I do want to know, why did you choose Eleanor Roosevelt?
To be honest, I picked her at random. I had no idea what she was about, but I didn't want to talk about the queen that you love so much yet. Maybe another time. Random. Totally random.
Okay. So how do you feel about that decision now after
Very good. Very good.
I think you chose great.
She was amazing.
She really was
amazing.
Yeah, I was so impressed with, I knew a little bit about her, but honestly, until the last few years, and I've realized how important understanding fairly recent modern American history was to me, it was my least favorite topic. I always preferred reading about foreign places, things that were exotic to me, distant times, distant lands. Now I understand, as somebody who wants to see a better world for my kids, why it is so very important that we have a better understanding. And I feel like it was fate that you chose her for a lot of reasons. One of them being that I can't wait to dig more into her fascinating life and how much of an effect she has had on the political climate and civil rights in this country. But another reason that it was really fortunate, I think, and fated that you chose Eleanor was, like I said, I originally wanted to do Tamiris because along with Eleanor of Aquitaine, another famous Eleanor, those are my two favorite historical women. But picking Eleanor was really fortunate because I was pondering the best way to introduce the food aspect in a show that was really fun and engaging. And some episodes, I think the food aspect of all of this, the dinner portion, is going to be just a minor part of the podcast. It'll just be maybe a little treat at the end. But I think that, as we discovered, Eleanor had a very, very big effect on how food was served at the White House, a surprising effect on how food was served while she was the longest reigning First Lady in American history. And so I think that we're both a little afraid to get to the dinner portion of this, quite honestly. But I think this is going to be a great way for people to get an understanding of how much food can impact someone's life and the culture, and how much it can be influenced by the culture that's around them. So again, I didn't know as much about her as I do about some of the other women we'll eventually be discussing, but I was thrilled to find out that food played a massive role in her time as First Lady to Franklin Roosevelt. So let's talk a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt and who she was, and what did food have to do with her life. Eleanor was born in 1884 to a massively wealthy and politically important Roosevelt family. Do you, Zahra, know much about the Roosevelts at all?
Yes. They're both very rich. They were both very educated. They were both very driven. They also had discovered that they had a crush on each other, even though they were cousins. And I have figured out that mother-in-laws have always been evil. Just kidding. Mother-in-laws have always had big part of, especially back then, big part of how your lives went once you got married. And because a lot of daughter-in-laws had to live with their mother-in-law because of their housing situation and how they were helpful with raising children and many other things, they affected how your marriage went. And whenever I was studying her, I saw many of the things, even though they were super rich, she still affected, her mother-in-law affected her life in big ways. And that's kind of made her even more driven and even more wanting to be independent and have her own thing. It's kind of like nowadays that's normal. Like, hate to give this example, but for example, Melania and Trump, even though they're very rich, both beyond anyone's imagination of us normies, they both have their own ideas, how to make money, how family goes, many things. But Roosevelt and Teddy had family values together in common, but what drove them was different, a little different anyways. So she really wanted to have her own thing, volunteering. Later on in her life, speaking of Trump and Melania, she had big parts in setting up NATO, had a lot of effects in it, and I think it's kind of embarrassing to see what they're trying to do to it, but how even back then, was it in the 40s? I'm very bad with numbers. Even back in the 40s, if you listen to her speeches and her interviews, you're like, wow, what was she, had provision to see that us now, some of us, not all of us, can't see that how important it is to protect each other even though we're not there, and how important it was to her to let everyone have a bite of the American dream. Both of those makes her very dynamic, and it's crazy that her mother-in-law pushed her into it.
I agree. And the fact that a lesser woman, instead of going on to flourish and become one of the greatest women in history, in my opinion, I was going to say in American history, but quite honestly, reading about the things that she influenced, she is one of the greatest political figures, honestly, yes. I think, in history, in a very small, rare group of people. And a lesser woman could have been cowed to just shut up and become the drudge that let her mother-in-law run all over her, but she went a different direction. I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about the Roosevelt family. They had been in the United States. They were what is called an old Knickerbocker family. In New York, there are a great deal of Dutch people that originally settled that area. And the Roosevelts were a family that had been in that area for hundreds of years by the time Eleanor was born. And the Roosevelts were huge. It was like the Kennedys, but much larger. It was a massively large family and a massively wealthy family. They had retained quite a bit of wealth over the hundreds of years that they'd been in the United States. Eleanor was born into a branch that was not quite as wealthy. Her father was actually the younger brother of President Theodore Roosevelt, and her mother was she was a socialite that their marriage was basically arranged. Her mother was cold and unloving. She thought that Eleanor was an unattractive child. She teased her about the way that she looked, and she was much closer to her father. Unfortunately, her father was a severe alcoholic. He was put in a sanitarium because of his alcohol abuse. Her mother died when she was 5. Her father died at 8 by suicide, by jumping through a window in the sanitarium that he was put in. Her
father? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, he didn't even die immediately. It was very sad. But she was raised after that by her cold, distant maternal grandmother. So she just had a really, really lonely childhood. She was then sent to boarding school at London at the age of 15, and that actually was one of the best periods in her life. This was the first time that she was allowed to be around women who were academics. that were living a life outside of just the genteel Knickerbocker society of New York, of the ultra wealthy of New York, where women were basically only allowed to be influential in the social sphere. They were not encouraged to be active in the political arena. They were not encouraged to work outside of the home. But this school that she was sent to in London was Allen's Wood Academy, and it was run by Marie Silvestre, who was noted for cultivating independent thinking in young women. Eleanor loved the headmistress there. She made Eleanor her protege. She recognized that she was an incredibly bright young woman. She was unfortunately forced to come home only 3 years later to make her societal debut, which must have been horrible for her to finally get in a place where she was not told that she was ugly and useless and just an appendage. She was allowed to let her mind flourish. She was praised for her intelligence and for her wit. And now she is basically, it had to feel like a prison that she's now told she has to come back and give up all of that to basically be a decoration for some powerful man. When she was forced to come home, she kept up correspondence with the headmistress, Marie Silvestre, up until that woman's death in 1905. When she died, Eleanor kept her photo and those letters with her everywhere that she went for the rest of her life, almost 60 years later. So that woman clearly had a very, very big outward influence. And maybe we can thank her for Eleanor having some of the strength that she exhibited in her marriage later on. So as we said, her favorite uncle was Teddy Roosevelt, her father's brother, who at the time of her marriage was actually president. And he gave her away at the wedding. And you mentioned that FDR was actually a very distant cousin of Eleanor's. He was something like a fifth cousin, I believe. They met in secret in 1903, and they started a little bit of a flirting correspondence with each other, but his mother was against her from the start. She did not like Eleanor. She thought she was ugly. She thought she was mealy-mouthed. She thought that she was too mannish, and she did everything she could to try to break them up. She even took him on a cruise to try to get him to break their engagement, but it didn't work. So they finally got married in 1905, and Eleanor, by all accounts, seemed to be in love with her husband when they got married, but I think that very, very quickly faded as she became basically a prisoner in her own home. Because as you said, Franklin's mother, Zahra, was absolutely horrible to her. She was unhappy. She was ill at ease in her home. The staff and the children were completely under the control of her mother-in-law, who did not allow her to have any say in their upbringing or in even the decoration or the running or the menus in her own home. Eleanor was not very maternal. One of the things that I did discover is she had a very, very fraught relationship with her children throughout her entire life. Several of them said that she was less a mother to them than their grandmother Zahra was. She just didn't seem to, I think in the world that if she lived in 2025, quite honestly, and there's a lot of historical debate about was Eleanor a lesbian. Did you happen to run into any of that when you were reading up?
I did. So apparently there was rumors about the headmaster.
There was some about...
So there was another rumor about some other lady, and I believe she moved in with her or actually no, that was the best friend, a gentleman that she liked because he was very educated, all that stuff that she liked. But then because she couldn't break up the engagement of them, she moved in with them until the end, until he died, I believe.
So what I gathered, I believe who you're talking about was a guy that was her bodyguard later in life.
Okay.
And they had a very, very close, strong relationship until he died. I don't know. She also did have a circle of women that she moved into her little part of their home in Hyde Park, New York. From my best guess, I think that Eleanor was at least bisexual. I think, or she
was it
had...
a term then? Was that a term that people use?
I don't believe it was. If it was invented, it was definitely not a popularly used term. Sexuality, that's a whole rabbit hole that we could go down. Like the labeling of sexuality is actually a pretty modern invention, like shockingly modern. I want to say like late 1800s, early 1900s. Basically, at least in American society, homosexual relationships always existed, but they were, as long as you no one expected that a man who might have had a relationship with another man, say in boarding school or something like that, would be at all unusual. But he was expected to then go on and marry a woman and have children, because that's what family.
Purple wedding, is that what they call it?
Lavender wedding.
Lavender wedding. Why did I say
Yes, there were probably a lot of those. There's also something called Boston marriages that I've heard about that are where two women, it was very popular at the late 1800s, early 1900s, where women, especially in New England, would have what they called Boston marriages, which were not legally sanctioned, but they were commitments that they made to each other, and they lived and had a household together, raised children together, and people just looked the other way. Labeling sexuality is something, again, that's pretty new, right? But if I had to guess, just from everything I've read about her, I think that she definitely, in my opinion, was bisexual. She had very loving correspondence with women where, and again, before our modern time, men and women both used to be a lot more florid in the language that they would use to each other and the descriptions of how much if you go back and read like some of Alexander Hamilton's correspondence with his fellow patriots, it seems very gay by modern standards. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not he was bisexual. But it's hard to tell because it was also just more acceptable for men and women both to speak of loving each other in more poetic, flowery terms.
Even in the Persian Empire there was, or in the Roman Empire was.
Right.
So it goes way back.
Right. Again, it used to not be nearly as much of a taboo as long as the modern or the primary family structure that supported children was not threatened. And I'm using air quotes when I say threatened. That just was a societal construct. But at any rate, I do think that she probably was bisexual. I think in a modern time, I don't know that she would have married and had children. That does not seem to be where her passion lied. Even though she seemed to be a very, very compassionate woman, she just didn't seem extremely maternal. So she was in this marriage. She seemed to fit like a square peg in a round hole. She was being bullied by her mother-in-law. And then in addition to that, she found out in 1908 that her husband was cheating on her with her own former secretary, Lucy Mercer. He wanted a divorce, but was forced to abandon it by his political advisor, Lewis Howe, and, surprise, surprise, by his mom, who threatened to cut him off. And FDR was an intelligent, charismatic, driven man. I believe that he is a large portion of the reason, or at least by listening to strong advisors, one of which was his wife, he was able to lead the world through World War II, but he was not a good husband, and he also seems to have been browbeaten by his wife, or his mother, who held the purse strings for most of his life until she passed. He promised to stop. His mother didn't want the divorce because it would have been socially ruinous. She felt like it would have completely...
Also bad for his politics.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like Kennedy's, hide the sister. They were like, no, if you get a divorce, you're ruined as far as your presidential hopefulness. Aspiration. There you go. I'm trying to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. So he gave up the idea of the divorce. He promised to stop seeing Lucy. That was Eleanor's one condition. But guess what? He did not. She was with him on his deathbed 27 years later. And she was not his only side piece throughout the marriage. Right. And after that, Eleanor and FDR basically led separate lives. She was the one that nursed him through his paralytic illness, though, in 1921. I'm going to just sidebar here. That makes her a vastly better woman than me. There is nothing on God's green earth that would have kept me nursing that man back to health if I had found out that he had betrayed me in such a awful, awful way.
And not just once.
Repeatedly. Not only that, not just the betrayal of, marital infidelity, but allowing his mother to ride roughshod over me in my own home and not speaking up and advocating for me. And I'm going to point out again here, I was not being sarcastic earlier when I said that my mother-in-law is wonderful.
No, I know. I'm kidding.
Oh, no, I know you know that.
Evil, but I'm kidding.
No, I know you know that. I'm pointing this out for any listeners that might be, because I'm going to make a point here about mother-in-laws. Mine is wonderful. Mine is also, in my opinion, or at least from my experience, pretty rare, because you're right. Mother-in-laws can often have a very, even today, when it's not the norm to have them living in your home, they can really have a very strong effect on your marriage. And I happen to have one who is absolutely wonderful, even though my husband is absolutely a mama's boy and worships the ground she walks on, and vice versa.
As she should.
Yes,
As he should.
Yes. And she worships him. She will tell you to this day, he never cried. He was the best baby ever. Blah, blah, blah. But somehow she is also my biggest champion and always on my side, and has made me feel comfortable and welcome in her family, and never once tried to. She somehow managed to be completely supportive of all of my parenting choices and still give her advice in a way that never feels like she's overreaching. She's wonderful. May I ever, if I am lucky enough that I have my kids find somebody and have a lifelong commitment to them, that I will be as wonderful as her example has been for me.
I think you're a lucky duck, but also I have no doubt that you will be.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, that's my goal, and it's from her example that I get that. But poor Eleanor, she had the opposite. And if I had a mother-in-law like that, and my husband did not advocate for me, there again, and it's hard. I don't want to judge her by modern standards, but it's just really difficult to put my head in the mindset of someone who didn't speak up for themselves. But again, she eventually did. She was young and she was not supported.
It wasn't acceptable to speak up, especially because she was tortured by saying she's not pretty enough. She probably was afraid that, if I speak up and, he does divorce me, then I'm going to just end up a lonely lady against and people are going to be like, whoa, she was ugly and she got a divorce. Now, another side note, many countries still operate like that. Many Middle Eastern countries, if you're in a rural area, your mother-in-law, even your his sisters have a big effect. My own mom, her second pregnancy, she was going up the stairs and dropping herself, so she aborts the child because they were so mean to her. And they never liked her because she was a country girl and he was a city boy. And compared to where I live, compared to the life I have, they're both country people. But that's not what they thought. And the social expectation of marrying your own level, your own, what have you.
Social
equal, or city versus country, farmer versus, what have you. They weren't equal. But my father's mother made sure that my mom had a miserable life, and then also his sisters. They would start problems. They would talk to him to a point where he would get balled up and just go beat my mom. Just many terrible things. And and that was in the 70s. So, late 70s. So still, to this day, households like that operate in Middle East. FYI.
Oh, I believe, yeah. And I think that it's not just the Middle East. I think that, but I do know that it is very prevalent there. If you remember, I had a cousin who married someone.
Middle Eastern.
Yeah, right, and I don't want to get too far into her business, but she had a very similar experience. And it's heartbreaking. It's awful. It's awful to think that in this day and age, there's still women that are treated like second-class citizens in their own home. So again, I shouldn't be getting into the business of judging Eleanor, especially because she did overcome. And I think that that betrayal that she felt when she found out that this love affair with her own husband was basically smoke and mirrors and that it was not real, really pushed her to finally advocate for herself, because they were trying to make her fit into this very stereotypical feminine domestic mold, and it just was not her. So after that, after she found out about Lucy Mercer, Eleanor and Franklin, as I said, basically started living separate lives. She did nurse him through his paralysis in 1921, which largely left him confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. His doctors even credited her with his survival. Sarah tried to talk him into retiring from politics at that time, but Eleanor pushed him to keep at it. And after that, Sarah's influence was less and less, and Eleanor began to run her own household as she saw fit. She had a smaller residence built at their Hyde Park estate called Valkill. This is what we were talking about, and that's where she hosted her political and intellectual friends. And eventually she did move a couple of those people in there, and they lived as a little family unit for most.
I never ran into that info.
Yeah. She really restructured her entire life to fit how she wanted to be. Again, I think she probably had some regrets about her role as a mother later in life. I don't know that her children had the best mothering, but I am happy. I can't help but be happy that she got some freedom and joy and peace once she gave up on this doomed marriage, and started to find her validation in other places. She didn't really want to be first lady. All the prior ones, even those who had been politically active, had given up their own lives when their husbands were elected so as not to, in air quotes here, overshadow them. She was the first presidential spouse to hold regular press conferences, and in 1940 became the first to speak at a national party convention. She also wrote a daily and widely syndicated newspaper column called My Day, which was another first for a presidential spouse. She was the first lady to write a monthly magazine column and to host a weekly radio show. She was a major political force for liberal causes, particularly those concerning human rights and racial and gender equality. She became the longest-serving first lady and reinvented the role for the modern age. After FDR died in 1945, she continued in politics, as you discussed a little bit earlier. She vociferously championed the formation of the United Nations and became the first chairperson of the UN Commission on Human Rights. She played a key role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is still used to define rights and freedoms due to all human beings around the world today. She died in 1962 at the age of 78. And I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to go back just a little bit and talk a little bit more about what you brought up earlier. I was so surprised to find out how much influence she had on racial, civil rights movement, not just women's equality, but equality for all people across the world became something that was very, very, very important to Eleanor. And we owe a great deal of some of our modern freedoms, not just in this country, but around the world, to her hard work. She wasn't perfect. Even towards the end of her life, there were things that she said and published that made her sound fairly anti-Semitic. She had some bigotry towards Jewish people. She was brought reluctantly towards, she didn't start out even being a champion of women's rights. That was something that kind of came later.
I think it was against her husband's politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that, some of it was initially she was reluctant to be seen to be standing in opposition to him, but she overcame that.
Right.
And there were several times through his administration where she spoke up for marginalized people, even in conflict with him. There is some argument to be made that, she could have maybe done more to help Black people in this country. But what she did do was so much more than what other people do. And here's the thing about Eleanor is that some of the people that we'll talk about on this podcast as I go forward are going to be people that are so far back in history that there's not going to be a great deal known about them personally. With Eleanor, it was the opposite problem. I could spend 17 years probably doing a podcast a day about Eleanor Roosevelt, and we still wouldn't cover how much she affected American politics and world politics.
So to me, the fact that she was well off and could have had this beautiful, what we refer to these days, trophy wife life, but she chose to advocate is very amazing. And it's she could have just had all the servants, all the people that made her life easy, listened to Sarah as she decided her life for her and just been good little girl, good little wife for his son, and then she would have been okay with her. But she chose to be what is referred to as a class traitor, sort of. And that's admirable.
Extremely. And in so many ways. And here I want to encourage anybody that's listening to this that doesn't know a lot about Eleanor to please look into her life and what she was able to accomplish. Again, we're not going to be able to comprehensively discuss a lot of that. This is just the very brief Cliff Notes version of her life. And we're about to really get into how food played a role in her White House time. But there's so much we're not going to cover today that I really want anyone else out here that's listening to this, please look into Eleanor Roosevelt. You're going to be shocked at how much control or how much impact Eleanor's life has on what is going on around us today and the life that you have enjoyed, the freedoms that you may have enjoyed and never realized that partly those were thanks to her hard work.
It wasn't Hillary, okay, guys?
It started with Eleanor. So let's get to Eleanor and food. So again, this was fortuitous because I was trying to find, a way to really introduce this idea of how impactful and important food can be on someone's life. And turns out that Eleanor had some very, very strong opinions about food, particularly while she was in the White House. Eleanor wanted the food at the White House to set an example of cheap, nutritious meals that could be prepared by the average American. She was elected, her husband, FDR, was elected right at the beginning of the Great Depression, and most of the country was suffering the devastating effects of that. Many people were standing in bread lines. Many people lost their jobs, their livelihood. Their kids were going hungry. Eleanor felt very strongly that the White House should be an example to the American people of how to eat cheaply but nutritiously. She did not want them to be seen as these coastal elites who were dining on caviar and lobster every night while the average American was out there suffering. But she was also strongly influenced by Martha Van Rensselaer and Flora Rose, who started the home economics department at Cornell University. So I don't know if you know much about home economics as a class in high school. Do you know anything about that, Zahra?
No, I didn't go to school either.
Well, right. And actually, Zahra and I are both in our late 40s. By the time I was in school, home economics was already something that was kind of on its way out. And it was more of a kind of a joke, really. I never took it. There were people that I hung out with that took it just to get the easy A. Okay. Because it was basically just thought of as a way to, you learned how to sew a button on and maybe bake cookies.
Okay.
But before that, and it was pretty much phased out by the time I graduated from high school in most places in the country, I believe.
Because you hired someone to sew back your button.
Right.
Or you throw it away.
Right, exactly. We were in a much more disposable society by then. But before that, it did have kind of this connotation of an example of women's oppression, that it was a girls' class to teach you how to be Susie Homemaker, to teach you how to, in our minds, growing up, my generation, we thought of home ec as a little bit insulting. That it was, what do you mean you want to teach me how to iron and sew on buttons and bake a cake? I want to go to college. So I was kind of surprised to find out that home economics actually started as a way to shoehorn women into higher education in a socially acceptable way. It literally was about the economics of running a home. These women wanted the average American woman to stop looking at herself as a housewife and think of herself as a homemaker and run her home more along the lines of efficiency and scientific principles of nutrition, as if she were basically a CEO of her home. Now, there were drawbacks to that. Even at the time, there were intellectual women who thought it was insulting that, in many institutions, the only funding that they could get for women's education was the home economics economics department. But honestly, I feel like they were really trying to do something. They were working within the confines of their time, the era that they were born into, and I thought they had a lot of really admirable principles. I'm super glad that I don't have to eat their food on a regular basis. So these women saw home economic not just as a housewife training, but rather as a way for women to run the nutritional, hygienic, economics, and child rearing in the home under strict, scientifically proven methods. And here's just a little quote from one of the articles that I read about them. Its founders envisioned training women in nutrition, chemistry, sanitary engineering, and other fields dominated by men, not to create female scientists, but to create scientific homemakers. The key to American progress was going to be intelligent housekeeping. The woman who boils potatoes year after year with no thought of how or why is a drudge, Eleanor Richards, the first president of the American Home Economics Association, explained. But the cook who can compute the calories of heat which a potato of a given weight will yield is no drudge. And this is from the first president of the Home Economics Association report. Eleanor was deeply impressed with their methods. She immediately wanted to implement their ideals into the White House. So she hires this woman named Miss Henrietta Nesbitt. Henrietta was not a cook. She was not a housekeeper. She had never run a large institution, such as a hotel or anything like that. But Eleanor hires her to be the chief of staff for the entire White House. Henrietta was just a woman from Hyde Park that had gone to Eleanor's church who had fallen on some hard times, and she was a baker. She would bake cookies and things like that, breads, things like that, and supplied them to the Roosevelts. And here was a opportunity that Eleanor saw to give this woman who needed a job some income, and also have someone that she thought of as a good, wholesome, down-to-earth American running the day-to-day operations. Her instructions to Mrs. Nesbitt were to serve the cheapest meals possible, except on extremely rare occasions when they had VIP guests like Winston Churchill. Mrs. Nesbitt was way out of her depth. She was unpleasant to the staff and allegedly ruined every meal she meddled in by, and this is a direct quote, hovering over the staff and making sure every recipe was overcooked or undercooked. And that was a quote from one of the women that worked under her on the White House staff. FDR hated her and begged Eleanor Roosevelt to fire her on many occasions. Eleanor refused. And I'm going to pause here and ask a question, Zahra. Do you think that Eleanor refused completely out of her loyalty to Mrs. Nesbitt and her commitment to this plain, cheap eating? Or do you think part of it was kind of a dig at Roosevelt? Because here's one of the things I learned in my reading. He was very embarrassed about leaving the house because he was wheelchair bound, and he really did not want anyone. This was a time when being differently abled was something that was deeply taboo. I mean, a lot of people saw it as a character failure if your legs didn't work, which is insane. I'm sure there are still people that believe that today. And especially for the leader of the United States of America, he felt like it would be extremely detrimental to his career. So he did not leave to go dine anywhere else. He was basically stuck eating there.
Was there restaurants back there?
There were, but again, he didn't want to go out and be seen in his wheelchair.
Gotcha.
So I'll cut that out. He was stuck there a lot, eating these meals that he absolutely hated from a woman that he could not stand. So do you think that it was partly to get back at him to a certain degree by forcing him to eat these horrible meals? Or do you think she genuinely just was led by her principles?
I think it had nothing to do with either. It was just something she was trying to normalize. Like, I know we can have, I don't think lobsters were a big deal back then, like as a luxury meal, but like she knew she could have whatever for him, but she wanted him to also set a good example. I don't think it was a dig. It was just, we're eating this. This is how we're gonna carry on. And I think they had I forget his name because it's been a week since I read it, but it was Hemingway, I believe. Mm-hmm. He was invited and he had a sandwich.
Yeah.
And decided, oh my God, this is terrible. So next time, because he was very famous and he went and told other people, obviously, you go tell people that Roosevelt didn't feed you well. everybody had decided if we get invited to the White House, we're going to eat sandwiches before we go because we're not going to get fed well. And I think that's hilarious.
I do too.
And I don't think it was a dig. I think it's just like, hey, everyone's suffering, you're going to suffer.
You think it was just her principles that she believed that this is...
It wasn't because he was cheating on her.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. There have been, when in the reading that I did, there were opinions back and forth about that issue. Was this just a scorned woman? But I think that's pretty sexist.
Yeah.
I think by the time they got to the White House, Eleanor wasn't interested in punishing him.
I mean, she took care of him through his sickness. So I think if she was bitter about that and wanted to take revenge, she would have just left him at a care, like, they had the money to hire, and it wasn't like they were suffering to have help. So basically, I think it was just everyone's doing it, you're doing it.
Yeah, I agree. So Eleanor said in her first book, It's Up to the Women, the mother of a family should look upon her housekeeping and the planning of meals as a scientific occupation. Her section on food in a chapter called Family Health began with the stern advice, do not eat too much. The recipes that were created at Cornell that she used, she claimed at the White House, took little notice of herbs and spices. She was very proud of that and borrowed nothing from the many immigrant households where flavorful, low-cost cooking had been underway since well before the Depression. So we've talked a little bit about how terrified we both are to eat.
I'm not terrified.
Oh man, I am. Those eggs.
I've had those kinds of food before.
The eggs. It's really the eggs. We're going to get to the eggs.
Okay. Do you not like eggs usually?
I love eggs.
Oh, okay.
Not the way that I had to prepare them today. Okay. But I think that that point that they're making about her not paying attention to the fact that a lot of immigrant people had been making very cheap meals that were still edible for a long time is probably valid. I think that Eleanor was a woman of her time. She had a lot of ideals, but initially, especially, at least initially as a younger woman, she didn't have a lot of exposure to other cultures and especially not to how they cooked and prepared their food. So she was really going on this principle of home economics that was borrowed from these people at Cornell. And those guys, man, they are the epitome of the jokes about white people and their aversion to spices and flavors. They were literally just looking at how to prepare the cheapest meal possible that would also meet nutritional standards.
So I feel like we cook whatever's around us and whatever we have exposure to and whatever's easily accessible. And back then, they only ate like bread and butter and whatever they could make on the farm. So it makes sense that they would eat nasty. I shouldn't say nasty. They would eat, potato or just make bread. All the easy stuff. So traveling to, let's say, Norway. They eat a lot of fish. They have access to fish. Russia, a lot of potatoes and potato salads. And so I think it has to do with what they have access to, and all the regions around most countries do the same. In America, it was a little different because we brought the traditions from wherever we were from, and it kind of had stayed with them. So maybe the food that she was serving was Dutch, right?
No. Well, I hear what you're saying, and I think that is a very, very interesting point. And that's part of, you articulated better than I did earlier when I was trying to give my rambling explanation about why I think food is so relevant to these historical figures, these women that we're going to talk about, because you're right. Like, food is your culture.
Right.
It is what, throughout time, people have used what is available to them. But I think here, she is not being influenced so much by Dutch culture as she is by British culture, which is the predominant culture of the ruling class in America, the predominant influence back then especially of the ruling class in America. And British people are famously have
toast,
terrible cuisine.
Bean, toast.
Yes.
Bean on toast?
Beans on toast.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. No, thank you. It actually was seen as something of a virtue to eat as bland. Like there have been times throughout, because I've been told very recently, most of the history that I like to consume was further in the past and not necessarily American history. And so I do know that at different points, eating as bland as you possibly could was seen to be a virtue, as if eating spices would somehow make you sick or could lead to, they were very big on plain, good, old-fashioned British cooking.
I think there's a joke about that. Like,
there is.
Did you take over all these lands and for spice, but you forgot to use it?
Yes, I've heard that too. And so I think that was part of the bias that was working on her, was this idea that adding herbs, because there was a woman who was a writer at the time, who was a food writer for the New York Times, who actually tried to work with Mrs. Nesbit. And I didn't include a lot about that because for time reasons, but she tried to work with Mrs. Nesbit because her idea was you can eat cheaply, but you can still make delicious meals by using different regionally available.
Right.
And
no,
Eleanor squashed that. Mrs. Nesbit hated her. She didn't like anybody else trying to influence how she did things. So that didn't last any time at all. I don't even think she made it to the inauguration day.
She got the shoe.
She got the boot immediately. And so I really think that it was just this idea, probably this scientific idea of nutrition and home economics was partially, I think, influenced, probably subliminally, by that bias, that British bias against anything that is flavorful can't possibly be that good for you if it tastes good. So that's how we get to how they ended up with famously the worst cooking in White House history.
Can you imagine if they had Taco Bells?
Oh man, I just feel like they would have been happier people. So the recipes that they served, they were created at Cornell, and she claimed that the White House took little notice of herbs and spices, and they borrowed nothing from many of the immigrant households where low-cost cooking had been underway since well before the Depression, as I said. The stuffed egg luncheon that we're about to have was included in the White House menu, and so was a stew of beans and tomato, a dish of fried liver and gravy brightened only by a slice of onion, and a carrot relish made from raw carrots and a bit of diluted vinegar. These recipes were planned with an eye towards dispatching two necessary jobs, cooking and eating, as efficiently as possible. I read a lot of quotes about Eleanor and her relationship with food that claimed that she saw food, and Eleanor actually said this herself, she saw food as fuel for the body and nothing more. Now, there is some argument to be made that once FDR passed and she was out of the White House and she had a bit more freedom about herself, that she absolutely did enjoy fine dining at different times. But in general, she just was not a foodie. She just wasn't. She saw food more for its potential to nourish. Right, for survival, a necessity to nourish the body and not something to really spend a great deal of time trying to tart up and make too fancy. So Eleanor had grown up with a very little idea about what happened in the kitchen. She was a product of her time of a very wealthy family back then where women were not in, they had cooks. They had cooks and household staff to do that sort of thing for her. But she was a quick study. So by the time she became, as the Washington Post put it, the first housewife of the nation, she had developed a straightforward message about her culinary goals. I'm doing away with all the kickshaws. No hothouse grapes, nothing out of season, she told a reporter who had inquired about the economy menus, and added that she intended to provide good and well-cooked food. Few guests or family members felt she succeeded in that. And as you mentioned, Ernest Hemingway came to the house, and he said that in 1937 for a dinner, and he said, we had a rainwater soup followed by rubber squab, a nice wilted salad, and a cake some admirer had sent in. An enthusiastic but unskilled admirer. So, yeah.
Not fun.
Yeah, and again, as you said, he also at that point learned that you just eat before you go. And his girlfriend, Martha Gellhorn, who was a reporter back then, she dined with the Roosevelts frequently, and she's the one that told him that everybody in Washington knew the rule: when you get invited to the White House, you eat before you go.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about what we're going to be eating.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Our main inspiration for this episode, as far as the menu goes, came from a 2010 New Yorker article by Laura Shapiro titled Eleanor's Kitchen and her subsequent book, What She Ate, which explores the cuisine of 6 famous women. This meal that we're about to serve was from the lunch menu on March 21st, 1933, which was 3 weeks after the inauguration. We have a menu of hard-boiled eggs, stuffed, and I learned here the difference between stuffed eggs and deviled eggs. Zahra, you asked me if I like eggs. I love eggs. I especially love deviled eggs. I make fantastic deviled eggs. These are not deviled eggs.
What's the difference?
Instead of having delicious mayonnaise and mustard, and if you like relish, I usually put pickle juice because my husband doesn't like the pickles to be in there, but I put a little pickle juice in and a little bit of sugar and some paprika and salt and pepper. That's how I normally make mine. These guys are stuffed with just the yolk, a little bit of vinegar, and it was supposed to be diced onions, but everyone in my house, their religion is their hatred of onions. Okay. It's the one thing that we all agree on. So I just put onion pepper in. That's one of the few ways that I kind of cheated, was that I just put onion powder in, too. So that's it. That's all the stuffing is made of, is onion powder and vinegar, and it's covered in a warm tomato sauce. So that was the primary part of the meal. That was the main dish at the White House lunch on March 21st, 1933, were these stuffed eggs covered in warm tomato sauce. And then I also prepared for us some mashed potatoes. Now, mashed potatoes are one of my favorite foods on the planet. And because I could not find the recipe of how she prepared them for the White House, I just cheated, or I don't know that I'm cheating, but I just went ahead and made them delicious the way that I normally make them, with lots of butter and milk. So that is one thing that I'm actually looking forward to in this meal. And then for dessert, we have a delicious cold prune pudding.
I think I would like that one.
Well, I haven't tried it, but I did lick the spoon while I was preparing it, and actually I think I might be pleasantly surprised by it, but we're going to get into that. So, and then we have some just plain old wheat bread to go with it. So we're going to pause right here for a second. I'm going to warm this food up real quick, and then we're going to try it. Okay, we're back. We've stopped. We've warmed up the tomato sauce to put on these yummy looking eggs, and warmed up our mashed potatoes, and here we go. So I think we should bite into the egg first, because that's the part I'm scared about. Oh God, it's so bad.
It's not good.
That is bad.
Eggs are so expensive. You're eating that.
I know. I accidentally bought an extra carton. I didn't realize we already had. Oh, the onions just hit my palate. Whoa.
I'm finishing it.
Oh, Zahra, you are a badass. Look at you.
Which one you're eating next?
Oh, I'm going to throw this bread to get the flavor off my tongue, and then I'm going to dive into these mashed potatoes.
They look good.
Oh, man. No bueno.
I don't like the tomato sauce on it.
No. Why? It's the onions, though, that really... That tasted like... somehow both the absence of flavor and
overpowering,
like batteries, like licking a battery. Oh man, that was awful.
Get your tongue off of there now.
Oh, yuck. I'm gonna eat a big scoop of these mashed potatoes.
The mashed potato is very good.
Thank you. I'm very proud of my mash. All right, I'm gonna eat a couple more bites of that, and then we're gonna try this prune pudding. We can finish our mash.
It looks good.
Well, so that's what I was going to say. The prune pudding, which sounds absolutely disgusting to me as my modern palate.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's interesting, Zahra. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
So, in Middle Eastern cuisine, we make a lot of like meatball-looking things. Mm-hmm. And prune is put inside of it. So, the prune gives it it gets cooked with the meat, with the flavors like cilantro, other stuff, and then prunes gives it very
like a sweetness,
a different flavor. And then we also, as you know, we use it for our children for their digestive system. So part of their cuisine is to eat prunes just like that. Mm-hmm. Not like, oh, I'm old, I can't go number 2, I eat it. They just eat it just because they eat it. Kind of like dates. They're getting hip now. Mm-hmm. But if you see, they're kind of similar in texture. Mm-hmm. But basically, we eat them just like candy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or absolutely.
Like, it's our snack that is super healthy, and not dates, but prunes are good for your digestive system. And flavor. It gives meat a different kind of flavor.
Yeah, one of the things that I read when I was reading up on this recipe, one of the pieces of advice they gave for the prune pudding is don't eat too much.
Yeah.
Because you'll be
Taco Bell in yourself.
You'll be on the potty for the rest of the day. However, I didn't grow up eating prunes very regularly. That's kind of a joke. Yeah. Regular. I didn't grow up eating prunes. They have kind of a really bad reputation in the United States that it is something that just old people eat. But as I said, I haven't tried the pudding yet. But the recipe calls for a lot of cinnamon and sugar. So it actually, I licked the spoon as I was getting done. And I'm not nearly as afraid of it as I was the eggs, because it actually seems like it's going to be pretty good.
The eggs were not terrible, but it could have used some mayo for sure.
The eggs were the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth.
Was mayo there around?
Yes, mayonnaise.
I wonder why she didn't use it.
I don't know. Why, Eleanor? Why? Okay, so let's take a bite of the pudding.
Okay. Let's see.
Here we go. Cheers.
Cheers. Air cheer.
Air cheers. It's not terrible.
Yeah, I like it. I'll be eating more.
I'm definitely not going to eat more, but I don't hate it. It just tastes like maybe the dessert that you would have at a retirement home. It's just, I mean, it's not offensive, but it's not really anything either. It does taste kind of sweet. I think dates are not as watery as prunes, because I've started eating dates.
They're good.
Oh, man, yeah, and it's something my bougie daughter has gotten me into. She started buying them at Trader Joe's that are stuffed with,
pistachio.
I haven't had pistachio, but I've had with pecan and honey. Oh, man, so good. So, to me, this kind of tastes like it's a mushy pudding made out of more watery dates.
What if we put it in a pie crust? Would you eat it then? Just kidding.
I think that the thing that I did think was pretty cool is if people were eating these back then during the Depression, it's pretty cheap. You could put, like, the recipe that I used is just this. It was the White House recipe. It's just the prunes softened and boiled with some sugar, some cinnamon, powdered cinnamon, and cinnamon sticks. But what I discovered is that the great thing about prunes, especially during times of economic hardship, you can dress them up all kinds of ways.
Right.
Like you could put nuts on them. You could put, brown sugar, just a lot of different things that you could. I was tempted to cheat and put in like some nutmeg and other things. So I definitely will never be afraid to eat prunes again.
Yeah.
They're not terrible. They're not like these hideous, godforsaken eggs. But it's not my favorite.
If soup, what would you think? If you had lived it back then and then she had served you the soup, or you had made the soup yourself?
Which soup?
She would have never invited us anyways, but
we would not.
This soup that you read, it was just a broth.
It didn't sound bad. I would have been fine with that. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been great, but I would have definitely lived through it. These eggs are abomination before God. They could just, one of the things I kept running into were when people were talking about Mrs. Nesbitt, were she could have spent the same amount of money. And I don't know that I mentioned this, but famously what Eleanor wanted them to shoot for was every plate was 7 cents or less.
7 or 7?
7 cents.
Okay. Oh, good.
That every plate could be prepared for 7 cents or less. And one of the things I kept running into was people saying she could have still achieved that goal and had some flavor. Right. You could have had mayo. You didn't have to choose vinegar and diced onions. It just seemed, and then throwing tomato sauce on top of it. Why?
Vitamin D, baby.
I guess it, hey, it's nutritious. But so there it is. There was our very first dinner for her. And now, hold on. Ooh.
Would have I picked someone else? Is that the question?
Nope.
Based on the cuisine?
Nope. We're done. We're done with the meal. We've survived it. That was great. Zahra, final thoughts on Eleanor, the food? Anything else you want to talk about?
Go to YouTube or wherever you get your information and research her. She's very influential. Hillary is not the woman you think she is once you find out about what our girl has achieved and pushed for. Also, I don't wish to be born then. I don't want to be born then. What else? I'm glad I didn't have to deal with a mother-in-law.
Amen. At least not one that was like hers.
Yeah, my mother-in-laws were both not in picture because I live in U.S. and they lived over there. And then the second one kind of had already cut ties because of how she was towards her own children.
So you dodged a bullet there.
Yes. And what else? Let's see.
Do you find Eleanor's life to have been more inspiring or tragic?
Inspiring. Because she made sure that she lived for herself as well towards the end of it. Not just the end of it, but mid. I think that those pressures to be pretty and be this trophy wife figure back then, and even now, some places, is too much. It does terrible damage to those ladies' brains. And I don't think that her worth was ever her beauty, but she realized what her worth was through her work and her advocacy.
Her own efforts.
Yeah, and she didn't need to be pretty to stand up for what's right. And she didn't need to be... She fast realized that her passion wasn't to be pretty and know how to play the piano. I've seen documentaries and shows from back then, and it's just like, oh, what do you know how beautiful your dress could be? How could you do your hair? What cute boy liked you, or what rich boy liked you? And I'm so happy that her standards were not it. I'm very thankful to know about her and know that she had an amazing life towards the end. But I don't see her as tragic.
No.
I think most strong women don't, even though they had tragedy, they don't see themselves as that, especially once they accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish.
I agree completely. I think that there were sad things in her life that upset me for her, but one of the things that I loved about getting to know her and the things that, I am grateful for, that, again, freedoms that I've enjoyed in my life thanks to her hard work, is that there is an enormous amount of societal pressure for women to be pretty over everything. And
influencers.
Oh, yeah, it's rampant today. And that makes, again, in talking about why I wanted to do this podcast, part of it is genuinely I want to leave something for my kids, especially my daughter, to hear about these strong, powerful women who may have been beautiful, but if they were, it was really incidental to who they were as a person, because as we know, that doesn't last for anybody. We all get older, and you cannot base your life. It's such a trap. You can't base your life around your physical appearance. But we're also in a patriarchal society where women are told from birth that being attractive is your most valuable commodity to the world. And it is incredibly difficult for anyone to push back against that, and particularly in the time frame in the society that she was growing up in, a lesser woman would have been crushed and she would have been a footnote to history. Mm-hmm. but she overcame every horrible thing that happened to her, and she made this amazing life and became one of the most influential people in history. And I'm so grateful that you picked her. I really enjoyed that, and I appreciate it.
Accident, but great surprise.
I feel like it was fate. So that wraps up our first episode of Dinner for Her. I need to mention that in addition to the aforementioned New Yorker article, I also drew on the author's book, What She Ate. It looks at several remarkable women through the lens of food, and I'm sure I'll be turning to it again for research throughout this podcast. Wikipedia was another source I turned to for some of the biographical details about Eleanor's life. I'd like to thank Mark Kirkman with Pirate Core Entertainment for all of his hard work on editing this podcast and giving me the platform to make one of my dreams come true. Also, I want to thank my dear friend Becky Anderson, with whom I host another podcast about TV, movies, and more called What's On Tonight. Becky has believed for years that the rest of the world was dying to hear what she and I had to say. She brought me into this world and has been invaluable in helping me learn the ins and outs of podcasting. Right now on What's On Tonight, we are covering the first season of the incredible medical drama, The Pit, which is available on HBO Max. Please do yourself a favor and check out the show and our pod. And mostly I really want to thank you, Zahra, for being such a brave soul and taking this strange journey back to the Depression-era cuisine with me. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Come back next time for another culinary adventure with the women who helped shape our world. And we're done.
Woohoo! Bye-bye. Bye-bye.